Good morning, everyone. This is the Monday, March 7th meeting of the Planning, Housing, Economic Development Committee. And we're taking up two items today. The first is continuing our budget review on agricultural preservation funding. And then we will dive into the Silver Spring downtown and adjacent communities plan. So Gene is prepared a packet for us today. And I will kick it over to you, Gene. You'll introduce everyone who's here from our county executive team and any other stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As you asked, we are joined today by some staff from the Office of Agriculture, Mr. Chris, the director, Mr. Scheffel, and then we're also joined by Mr. Harrigan from OMB. This is the Capital Improvements Program review for the agricultural easement purchasing. This CIP project's been a long-running one and provides funding so that the Office of Agriculture can purchase additional easements as funding is available. As noted, the average price can be anywhere, the range of prices for easements can be anywhere between $1,600 to $9,000 per acre, depending on the condition and the economy. The county executive more or less recommends a level funding for this project. As in previous years, there's about $3.2 million worth of expenditures in this budget. But as noted by council staff, about 70% of that is for what's known as planning, design, and supervision. And this includes 2.25 full-time equivalents, as well as other expenditures such as the deer donation program, the county weed control program, and the cooperative extension partnership with Maryland. And that makes up about 70% of the expenditures in this budget over the next 6 years. The other 30% is for the purchasing of easements, and it's known. It looks as the $170,000 a year for land in terms of the expenditure schedule. The funding comes from multiple sources, including the agricultural transfer tax, although that has been reduced significantly throughout the years due to the fact that we just don't have enough agricultural land that is being transferred from that use to some other use. And so there's other funding in this CIP project as well, including contribution, developer payments, and investment income. And when we can, hopefully some state aid and other things such as the supplemental that was approved recently by the council. So again, the council staff, council staff has a couple of recommendations. Should the committee want to consider a different approach than what Mr. Elrich has recommended? Again, 70% of the funding is for planning, design, and supervision. And of that funding, most of it is not for agricultural easement purchases. We've talked about this before in previous years. And so the funding, if we would remove some of those non-easement expenditures in the CIP, would free up funding for agriculture easement purchases, which is the purpose of this project. But as noted in the staff report, that is challenging because all of the funding in this project is unique to this project. So should the committee decide to reduce some of those non-easement expenditures, additional support would be needed in the operating budget. And those are important programs and staff to continue to have in the Office of Ag. But they would need to move to the operating budget. And so council staff presented two options. Again, should the committee not want to move with the executive's recommendation, the first would be to simply remove all of the expenditures in fiscal 24 and then continue that through fiscal 24 through 28. The primary reason staff did not recommend it in 23 is we expect the county executive's recommended 23 operating budget pretty soon. And so it's likely not going to include those expenditures in the operating budget. And so this gives another year for the executive to find those resources and include it in the operating budget. And if the committee would go with that option, that would free up about $1.3 million over the 6 years for purchasing easements. The second option is to smooth that out a little bit starting in fiscal 24 and ramp down some of those non-easement purchases throughout 3 years. And the primary difference between option one and option two is that there would be about $400,000 less over the 6 years for purchasing easements. Certainly, if the committee would go with either of those options, we would need to make sure that the operating budget continues to have those non-easement expenditures in the operating budget because we would not want to, again, lose those resources for both the staff and the Office of Ag. There's also another technical amendment I want to talk about, but I'll stop there in terms of those two options related to boosting this CIP project for more ag easement purchases as opposed to non-ag easement purchases. Thank you.
Great. And 2 years ago, I think, as you explained, the committee sent a letter to the executive asking for the executive to go through a multi-year process to move the positions out of the fund so that the fund could be devoted to purchasing easements. And as of now, that has not happened. So we're presented with this budget here, and you've provided us with some recommendations about how we could achieve the goal that we asked the executive branch to propose, and they haven't proposed. Okay. Well, why don't we hear from colleagues, and we can hear from Mr. Chris. I'll say I'm favorably inclined towards option one, just to start us off, and let's see where we go from there. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I also am strongly in support of option one. It would reflect what this committee has previously done and asked the county executive to do, which unfortunately has not been done up to this point. We don't expect it to be done in the next week before the operating budget comes out, changes to allow for this change to happen, which I understand. I would also recommend, because we have been pushing for this and because there is a year delay, I think that we need to allow for that transition to happen, to be prudent. But I also think that we should add $500,000 to ag preservation for this year. And so I wanted to propose that to colleagues. It would allow for us not to compete these particular expenses, which have been inappropriately included and have crowded out ag preservation for years and years and years, were done as an emergency measure during the Great Recession and have never been removed. And there has been a compounding effect of that over the course of more than a decade, which has impacted our ability to preserve agricultural land and to utilize the funds as they are intended. These are funds coming from transfer taxes. These are funds coming from sources like BLTs that are supposed to be used for ag preservation. They haven't been. I think there was a reasonable understanding in the depths of the recession for needing to make emergency fiscal decisions that maybe we didn't like and weren't thrilled with, but I needed to figure out ways to balance the budget. But it's not appropriate to continue that for more than a decade when it's not an appropriate use of funds. So I would support option one. I would also put forward to colleagues and hope their support for us adding $500,000 for ag preservation for this year. And that will allow for us to transition, but not have to wait for addressing the impacts on the agricultural community, which this committee has staunchly supported in years past and has been asking the executive branch to move on and move forward with for several years now.
All right, so adding 500,000 in addition would be through current revenue, is that right, Gene?
I believe that, yes, that's the only option available to the council to add more funding right now to this particular project.
So it would be current revenue in the CIP, and it would be a 1 year. You're recommending 1 year.
Just 1 year, just for fiscal 23.
FY23.
And then have the change for 24 and beyond. So allow for that 1 year transition, which we wanted to have happen. We're essentially doing what we asked the executive branch to do previously. Like if the executive branch had moved on what this committee had asked for, this is effectively what the result would have been. So it's literally putting the money where our memos are. In addition to that, I will just note, last year the county executive proposed, and this council approved, although I raised objections to, $15.5 million in cash, current revenue, out of the capital budget and into the operating budget. $15.5 million. This proposal would put 500,000. I think we should put all 15.5 million back. But I recognize that is not likely to be proposed by the county executive. It would be very difficult for the council to do. All this is saying is follow through on what this committee has put forward previously, put our money where our memos are, and to return $500,000 of the $15.5 million that was cut out of the capital budget last year. So that's, I think it's a modest proposal. This is not radical. This follows through on what we've said. There's some suggestion of doing $500,000 on top of the commitment every year. I don't think we're prepared to do that at this point, although I hope that we can revisit this funding in the future. And so I think that this is a reasonable approach and something that I hope the committee will support.
Okay, so here's my thinking here. I think it would be great for us to be able to fund this. Obviously, I think it'd be great for us to fund, many critical priorities. If we are to recommend adding this to the current revenue use, it does, as you suggested, it does compete with the operating budget. If we as a committee recommend it, they will try to fit it in, and we don't know if they can. The CIP is very tight. How much current revenue we provide to it is unknown. So there's a lot of unknowns, ahead of us with our ability to actually get it done. I think it could be fine to recommend it while kind of highlighting it in yellow and saying, we understand that there are many priorities here. But in this budget, FY23 is what we're talking about. We don't know if there's funding, but if there is, we'd like to see it funded. So I guess, that's my general point. The bigger point is we also want to, over the long term, do this. So it's easier for us to do it next year and the years after, because we believe by adopting it in the CIP this way, the executive branch will actually implement it, although they haven't so far. So, first of all, I think the bigger picture critical point is, let's really get clear that this is what we want to see happening in the future. And that's what option one does. And then, the next question is, can we find resources to do it this year? I'm comfortable proposing that we should, but I don't know truly how possible that is. Councilmember Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. Good morning. I just wanted to hear from the Agriculture Office about their views on the two options in the packet. Obviously they both are saying the same thing, just different pacing, right? That one is more of a phase in to the general budget, so it's a little more light, doesn't hit us as hard, but sends, I think, the same general message. And then any other comments you had based on the conversation, I just would love to hear from Mr. Chris and Mr. Sheffel about it.
Good morning, everyone. Jeremy Chris, Office of Agriculture, along with Mike Sheffel. I first want to thank Gene and Derek for their packets. They've done a really good job outlining the issues. Gene, you're correct. This is exactly the options 1 and 2. That's what you recommended during the February 24th, 2020 FED committee work session. If Jacob Sesker was here, he's the one that coined the phrase, this was back when we used to be the Department of Economic Development, Ag Services Division. Jeremy was just kicking the can down the road as we talk about these planning, design, and supervision expenses that are being charged to the CIP. And as Gene indicated, it's negatively impacting our ability to use the limited money that we do have to purchase easements. So we would support either option to address these funding parameters. We used to call them future fiscal impact. And we have a lot of opportunities that we would like to take advantage of right now. So we hope that we can address this.
Appreciate it. And Gene, it's about 400,000 difference over the next 6 years, looks like, between the two. And okay. Yeah, well, I'm happy to support option one with my colleagues. I share their concerns on the additional funding. I don't think while I agree that, we need to head in that direction, I worry about the pressures on the operating budget. So I don't think I'm prepared to support that. But I would definitely support option one. So thank you.
Okay. Councilman Freeze.
Yeah, thanks. If we could just, I understand it doesn't seem like colleagues are interested in moving forward on the 500,000, but before we dispose of this entirely, could Mike or Jeremy just explain what Montgomery County does in comparison to other jurisdictions? We talk a lot about how Montgomery County leads on some of these issues, but we are not a leader or anywhere close when it comes to some of these ag preservation efforts. So I think the context is important. If it's okay, just to quickly note that, and then we can dispose of it.
Can I just clarify, though? I'm in favor of making this recommendation, but I want it to be clear that we understand that resources are not, necessarily available. And so I would just want it to be flagged. And if we can find the money for it, that'd be great. That's my general feeling here.
But what does that actually mean? I just worry about.
So this is a CIP. This is a CIP recommendation. So if this was an operating budget recommendation, then it would go through the reconciliation process, and we would add it, to the list, and then we would see how much funding we have available, and then we would all vote for how to use that funding. The CIP is done differently, and it's a lot less procedural. What happens is all the recommendations, including for current revenue, get stacked up, and then the council staff working with OMB tries to figure out how to make it work. And if they can make it work, then it gets funded. And so if they can't make it work, then they have to figure out what to drop out. And so, the council president tends to steer that process a little bit more than the operating budget reconciliation list. So I guess that the long and short of it is, we can ask for it to be included. They can try to make it work. And if they can't, then they can let us know that they can't fund it, but they can try. Am I describing that accurately, Gene, in your view?
Yes, you are. The recommendation from the council would go to the committee. I'm sorry, backwards. The recommendation from the committee to the council would be $500,000 of current revenue in 23. The council as a whole will need to support that as the council goes through review of this process, and then it would go through the reconciliation process you're discussing.
Andrew.
Yeah, can I just clarify? So that is true to a certain extent, but it is also true that the fiscal policies that constrain the capital budget are related to GO bonds, general obligation bonds. Those are hard and fast fiscal policies. Current revenue is a little bit of a different animal. And current revenue is cash, which relates to the operating budget, decisions we make in the operating budget, but it is in the capital budget. The policy on current revenue in the capital budget is that we have minimum thresholds for current revenue in order to make sure that our overall debt load is being paid now for later obligations. And that proportionality of that, which is very important to the rating agencies and very important for the county's long-term fiscal health, is kept to a certain degree in balance. So I'm just to be clear, they to me is we, us. This committee goes to the full council. Staff does help to reconcile all of these determinations, but ultimately it's our decision, and it is not just a capital budget general obligation competition, which is generally what you are referencing, where there's only certain amount of general obligation bond fund capacity and there is no wiggle room once we make that decision to change that. And so we have to fit in the projects within the 6-year CIP to fit that pie, so to speak, and we have to fit the pieces into the pie, but with current revenue, it's a little bit different with that, particularly because this is current revenue that isn't part of a larger project. So I share the question. I hope that we will support it, but we either support it or we don't. We see what happens at full council, and then ultimately we have to make capacity decisions and determine what competes with what. But we do that all the time in these conversations, and I'm not sure why we wouldn't do it here if there is support. If there's not support, I respect that and can understand that, and we can move on. But if there is support, I can't recall a time when we've had this similar level of concern of affordability at the end when we decided what we wanted to put into the budget. Ultimately, those decisions will have to be made, but they're made at the appropriate time of the process, from my perspective at least.
Does that answer the question, Councilmember Dewanto?
Not really. I mean, I understand, but there's two different kind of viewpoints, a little bit. And we had this long discussion with Mary Beck last week about it's either in the CIP or it's not. And then if it is, we got to move things around. And then we've got I get the point about the general revenue, which has the impact on the cash piece of it on the operating side. So I just think if we send the direction that it's going to happen, it's going to likely happen. And so I don't know when that's why I'm saying I think we should just try to do it next year. But we're already taking this one step as a committee, and then hopefully in future years we can figure this out in a better way. But it's that. So it sounds like you two have to decide what you want to do.
I'm fine with recommending it.
Okay.
I'm prepared to recommend it, and I don't know if we'll be able to keep it in. We have a lot of major decisions ahead of us. We have no idea what this budget's going to be like. So I think let's try to put it in there, and let's see if we can keep it in there. That's, but at the end of the day, there's going to be probably some tough decisions that we have to make, and we'll have to ultimately, reconcile a lot of different priorities. So that's my only point.
It's kind of like, just, do you want to create the expectation? It's kind of like, how do you want to pursue it? And so I think
exactly. My comment here is I'd like to do it, and if we can find the money for it, that would be good. And I'm just trying to create the expectation here that we don't know, because this is current revenue. It ultimately competes with the operating budget, and I just have no idea what the operating budget is going to be like this year. So
could you just speak to that point that I'm raising about like that Mary Beck? The reason I'm not as supportive right now is because I don't want to, if we send that direction and they make it work and they make in some other place it happens, something else is moved out or not done, and I don't get to comment on that in real time. That's my issue with how it was presented last week with the CIP versus the more traditional operating budget reconciliation list. And if there's going to be a way, we just add a bunch of things to the list, this being one of them, where we can come back and look at all of them and then decide, I'm fine with that. But that's not how it was presented last week. And I just want to make sure I understand the process going forward if we were to make a recommendation.
Sure. I can't speak to what Ms. Beck spoke about last week because I wasn't there. Certainly, as we've talked, the committee can make a recommendation to support $500,000 of current revenue in fiscal 23 for the CIP project. And then it would go through the process, which is the council would review that recommendation from the committee, either support it, and then it would go in, not final, but it would go in. And then as always, the council staff and executive staff have to work to present reconciliation options on the CIP, which is what Mr. Reimers has spoken about if there's too much of any particular expenditure. And so that's when the council would review it. But beyond that, I can't speak much more to the process because that's all I know in terms of this particular approach.
Okay. I mean, I just think when you're saying the council has to review it, obviously, yes, of course, but how it gets presented to us and what gets moved where is what I'm talking about. And that I know you weren't there, but last week it was presented a little differently. So I'll seek, I guess we'll just have to seek clarity offline about what the process is going to be, but okay. All right.
Okay. All right. Andrew, final comment, and then we can move on.
Okay. I'm not aware of a way to make lukewarm recommendations through like the normal policy process. So I'm just a little concerned and hope that if we're voting for something to be in, that we're voting for it to be in, and we have to make affordability decisions at the appropriate time. And that's the decision, whether it's a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 or whatever it is, or it fails. I can respect that. I just hope that we have similar conversations every time we are having these discussions, and not just on agriculture and ag preservation, because that is literally the exact same thing in every single conversation we have as we go through the CIP, and particularly as we go through current revenue aspects of the CIP. So I just wanted to note that there is no mechanism. The confusion here is there is no mechanism to say, I'd like to do this, or I think we should try. There is we're voting to do this, or we're voting not to do this. That is the only legislative mechanism that we have. And so I just think that we need to be clear that we are either voting to put this in, and we can understand what the process is, and that there are affordability constraints down the line, and we have to make decisions at ultimate point, and the budget will be what it will be, and the capital budget will be what it will be, or we're not. But we either vote to put it in, or we vote not to put it in. There's no with clarification or with reservation, or there's no context to the vote. There's just a vote. Like, I just want to be clear about that, of our role in this process. I'm a little uncomfortable if we put something in and say, well, but we're just doing it so we can try. I agree where Councilmember Jawando was coming from on that, and I just wanted to clarify even if we're on different sides of this vote, I wanted to kind of double down on that point, because that is a key point. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Councilmember Jawando.
No, I agree with you. We should either do it or not. I mean, Mr. Chris, go ahead and chime in. Yep.
Yeah, Jeremy, Chris, thank you. You had asked a moment ago, and Andrew asked, tell us what some of the other counties are doing. So when we met with the county executive, we in fact used a couple examples of surrounding counties. Carroll County, for instance, they have 170,000 people. It's where Mike and myself were born and raised. They allocate 2.5 million county money, and that's for FY22. The other example that we provided to the executive is Baltimore County. They provide 5.2 million for FY22. And in Frederick County, they allocate 5 million. So there are some other counties that are putting up local money in order to be competitive with the state of Maryland, leveraging state dollars. For every state dollar, it's about a 60-40 match with the matching fund, how it works. So we haven't been able to participate in that matching arena because we've had very little money on hand. So that's a summary of where we are.
Okay.
All right.
Let's just recommend it then. Let's just recommend it 3-0 then.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, again, to be clear, what we're trying to do is create a significant amount of additional funding over the next 6 years by transitioning these pieces out of the budget. Unfortunately, the executive did not recommend it in his capital budget, so the way we were hoping. And so we're in a tight spot. We're talking about $500,000 in real money. And that's a lot of money. I mean, in my experience with the operating budget, $500,000 is serious money. And so I'm trying to be supportive while just expressing that $500,000 is a lot of money. And I don't know if we can get it all, but we can try. All right. So that's then 3-0 committee recommendation?
Yes. And right. Mike and Jeremy, my mom lives in Carroll County, so that's good people up there. Okay. Yeah, Gene.
So thank you. 3-0 recommendation, both for option 1 and both for adding $500,000 in fiscal 23 from current revenue. The only last item is more of a technical amendment to the text. The text I think, erroneously omitted all of the FTEs that are currently in the CIP. And so all council staff is recommending that we update the text. And given the committee's recommendation, the text will also be updated to note the moving of some of these expenditures out in fiscal 24. Council staff can work with executive staff in terms of the exact language that'll go before the council, but wanted to know that the committee should recommend updating the text to reflect its changes and just the reality of what FTEs are in this budget.
Great. And unless the council members' comments be interpreted otherwise, I hope it's clear that this committee continues to expand the amount of resources that are available for agriculture in this county. And we are putting in place a strong recommendation here to work our way out of what was put in place during a fiscal crisis and to get these positions funded through operating budget resources. And it's a very significant amount of additional funding we're seeking to put towards preservation. And so, that's the story of what this committee is doing here, all comments notwithstanding. All right, thank you. Okay, that concludes this item. Thank you very much, Gene. Let's go to the next. Good morning, Pam. Good morning, Lavu. Okay, we can get rolling. Pam and Lavu, why don't you take us in, introduce our participants, and we'll get rolling.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Yes, this morning we are having the very first work session on the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Plan. There are several people from planning here. As you can see, Director Wright, Chair Anderson. The lead planner for the plan is Atara Margolis, and she's on this Zoom meeting as well. And we have other planning staff. They have support staff that help write certain sections of the plan, and other people who are involved in its efforts. So they're online. They are, there for resource if something comes up. We can jump into the plan. I don't know if Atara wants to make a few comments before we start.
No, it's all right, Pam. You can just go ahead.
Okay. So this, just to lay out the groundwork, you have Livu and I here today. We've been working on this plan or this staff report, and this one will cover the introductory sections of the plan. And then the plan provides recommendations related to 8 districts. They have taken the plan area and created 8 different districts with sort of unique characteristics and attributes. And so they want the committee and the council to understand sort of the uniqueness of each of these districts related to their recommendations. And then as a whole, there are plan-wide recommendations. So we'll get to those later in March as we go through these work sessions. But for this work session, it's introductory material and 4 of the 8 districts. Next week, you will be getting the remaining 4 districts, the recommendations, and we will then start to dive into the plan-wide recommendations. We will not get to all of those in one week. We will start with the land use and zoning ones and just see how much we can cover next week, and then things will follow after that. As everyone knows who's been following anything in the planning department for a while, the Silver Spring Plan, Downtown Plan really is about downtown Silver Spring. It is the area of Silver Spring right outside of DC. It is centered along the intersection of Georgia Avenue and Colesville Road, and the downtown area is surrounded primarily by single-family residential homes. The plan area for this master plan covers approximately 505 acres, and it's bound by Eastern Avenue to the south, 16th Street to the west, Ballard and Spring Streets to the north, and portions of the Seven Oaks, Evanswood, and East Silver Spring neighborhoods to the east. And also, as many people know who've been in the area for a while, that Silver Spring is really known for its uniqueness and its diversity. It has several small businesses that are owned by a variety of different nationalities and cultures, and it really provides that fabric to the downtown that everyone is used to seeing and brings a lot of people in. Some of the most successful developments, though, in the area have been around the Ellsworth area and the Civic Building that was transformed after the early 2000s and has really changed the way that people interact in downtown Silver Spring in a very positive way. So it was a very positive public-private partnership that started that. The plan provides a vision for the downtown area. Again, off of this theme of diverse and distinct identity. It envisions that hopefully an area that will continue to thrive, will have businesses and arts, hopefully more jobs in research and technology, education, and that the plan also hopes through its recommendations that the vision for the future is one that provides more open spaces and a healthier community with better connectivity for all. On the second page of the staff report at the bottom, we list the plan goals. These goals are devised to try to achieve this vision, and they are organized around key values and themes. There are 4 of them: diversity, connectivity, resiliency, and community health. I won't read them all here, but they are listed in the staff report because they give you the context for the recommendations that are going to get put forward for each of these distinct districts. Before we dive into the districts, I did just want to mention 2 of the concepts in this plan for the plan-wide land use and zoning, because they provide context for when you see the recommendations by district on things like zoning, right? The first one is the building height incentive zone. It's an area in the downtown. It does not incorporate the whole downtown. It is a part of it in which an optional method project can increase its building height, its mapped height up to 150%, to a maximum of 300 feet, and that approved height would be subject to a design review panel. The plan also recommends that for certain properties in the Metro Center District and Ripley District, the planning board can approve that height up to 360 feet. But otherwise, basically, the approach to zoning recommendations in the plan for height were to provide each property in general a height increase of about 20%. And this was to really eliminate that T designation that were provided during the rewrite when CBD zones were translated into CR zones. So, you know, when you get to the zoning recommendations per district, and you'll see very similar language in each district. It is this idea that there were not a lot of individual changes to property, more plan-wide changes, and then the introductions of these 2 new concepts. But again, we're going to cover the concepts in probably next week. The second one, though, just so you also are aware, is the Connectivity and Infrastructure Fund. And it was set up for properties in the plan area that need additional density to reach either their maximum, their mapped height, or additional height they might receive under this building height incentive zone. And the additional density is obtained by, as the plan states, making a contribution to this fund. And it states that the contributions will be made only for density above the total mapped, density approved under density averaging, and or bonus density for providing MPDUs above the minimum. And that the plan in general, again, takes a generalized approach to zoning changes in general, and it recommends equalizing the commercial residential values for the CR zones in the plan for maximum flexibility, but total density on most properties did not change unless the property was deemed to be non-conforming, meaning that it had developed under a prior zoning code well before the CBDs and had more density than was currently shown on the zoning map, so they corrected that. And again, these 2 concepts will be covered next week. But with that, so you have a general idea when we do talk about the zoning recommendations per district, kind of what the philosophy was for those. We'll get into the.
Can I ask a Pam question here?
Of course.
Why isn't there more upfront about creating a really strong commercial core? You know, we are actually in the plan, I think, zoning buildings to a pretty high, you know, we're trying to seek their development, you know, at significant tall buildings in downtown Silver Spring, especially at the core. And we would hope that they would be commercial. You know, we'd like to see that. Why is that not a clearer goal of the plan to create a strong commercial center for the county? You know, I know that a lot of it is seeking to make the Silver Spring a great place to work and to live. But why not more upfront about just, you know, the goal here is to create that environment.
Can I speak to that?
Yes, so I'm Councilmember Hucker is here, and he's raised his hand. That was Casey Anderson who said that I could speak to that? Yes. So Casey, if you'll respond. See, Councilmember Hucker has joined us. As I said at the beginning of my last, I'm in my car. I don't quite have my full I don't have a laptop in front of me. I'm working off my phone, so it's a little harder for me to see everybody. But go ahead, Casey, and then Councilmember Hucker.
Yeah, I think there's two answers. I'm not sure you'll love these answers, but I think they're true. The first is that unless you want to restrict the amount of residential development, there's not a lot you can do with zoning in order to push anybody to build commercial. It would be one thing if we felt like there was such limited capacity available in downtown Silver Spring that we needed to limit the amount of residential development because otherwise we'd be crowding out commercial, but we don't think that's the case. We think that there's plenty of envelope for more commercial development to the extent that there's a market for it. The second answer, which may make you feel a little bit better, I don't know, is that, and I think you alluded to this a second ago, the idea that ultimately what the local government has other than subsidies to attract jobs is to make places where people want to be. That means residential, retail, amenities, infrastructure, biking and walking, transit, even road infrastructure for that matter, things that make people want to be in a place and make a place function at a high level are the things that make employers want to be there. And so we think that even though it would be more satisfying to find a more direct inducement to commercial development, ultimately, realistically, the best way to encourage office employment and other employment uses is to create a great place where people want to be that's high performing along every dimension.
Right. Well, I agree with that. I think, and I guess what I'm saying is we're kind of missing an opportunity to explain that, as well as to put up front, that that's a goal of the plan, is to ensure the commercial vitality. Because, we've got here focusing on the retail market, but actually, there's an additional goal here, which is to make Silver Spring a place that companies will want to be.
We absolutely agree. Yes.
So can we maybe find some plan goal language we could add here that would kind of express that? I think it might help clarify. Councilmember Hucker.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, I always try to agree with you in this committee. I just wanted to second your comments about. I think there are a lot of good things in this plan, and I think it reflects a lot of the sort of uniqueness and many of Silver Spring's builds on many of Silver Spring's strengths, including our small businesses, our diversity, our arts community, and our brand. On the other hand, I feel like there's been a sort of a bias for quite a while that is a little bit possibly reflected here, that, like Bethesda is our business powerhouse in Montgomery County, and it's where we want businesses to grow and locate, and Silver Spring is this kind of quaint, artsy, nonprofit-y place that needs bike lanes and green space. And I'm all for bike lanes and green space, as everyone knows, but I feel like it's a little bit, we would benefit from more detail on some of the big unanswered questions in Silver Spring. Like we have, we've lost jobs, as we discussed during the bid hearings, I think 19 years in a row since Discovery moved to Silver Spring, and now, of course, it's left. What are we doing to grow jobs in Silver Spring? What are we doing to fill up Inventa Towers with commercial businesses? What are we doing to fill up the businesses near the metro with commercial tenants? What are we doing to fill up the businesses around the Ellsworth District with commercial tenants? We've had very high commercial vacancies rates for quite a while in Silver Spring. And many of the folks I talk to want more bike lanes, but they also want more jobs and more businesses. And we have a lot of resources available to us, both planning staff, MCEDC staff, outside consultants, state staff, and I think we should tap into those and add some detail in this area, because I think a lot of the folks I've talked to would like to see more of a plan about how we attract jobs to Silver Spring, not just amenities. Amenities are great, but I'm not sure everyone's convinced that amenities alone bring jobs and commercial investment. There are a lot of people that specialize in jobs and commercial investment. There are a lot of pretty places around the country. They don't all have jobs and commercial investment. And Silver Spring, while I don't want to pit one against the other, I think we're strong on the artsy, nonprofit, diversity emphasis of our brand, but we really need to strengthen what we're doing to bring jobs and commercial investment to Silver Spring.
All right. So we will work with council staff, can work with planning, and we'll build some language out here that talks a bit more about the commercial strategy for the plan. I do want to note that the Bethesda downtown plan focused in a major way on creating bike lanes and green space. So, that is the recipe for creating a place that companies want to be, but there's more to it as well. And so I know, go ahead. Yeah.
I know we agree. I just remember Chairwoman Florine at the time saying, if we can't build in Bethesda right by the metro in our economic powerhouse, where can we build? Where can we recruit jobs? People should get comfortable with the idea of bringing jobs and businesses and density near the metro to Bethesda. And I would just like to see the same sort of commitment to commercial development, not just bike lanes and parks, which I'm very supportive of and voted for in Bethesda as well. I'd like to see that kind of commitment in Silver Spring, because I think they're both critical assets to the county.
All right. Great. So we'll get more focus on the commercial strategy and how it plays through. Pam?
Great, thank you. Yeah, I have taken notes and I'll work with planning staff on that. Get you some draft language. So this brings us to page 4 of the staff report. This is where we dive into the districts, and you'll see at the bottom of that page is a map that shows the way in which the planners have laid out or established what they believe are the different districts that represent the downtown core and adjacent communities. You have South Silver Spring, Falklands District, Downtown North, Metro Center, Ripley, Ellsworth, Fenton Village, and the adjacent communities. And today I'm going to first cover the Downtown North and Ellsworth District, and then Ms. Nadeau is going to cover the Metro Center and Ripley District. And all the remaining districts will get covered at the beginning of next work session. So with that, we are at the top of page 5. And for each of these districts, the planners have set out a vision for that specific district, and then goals that are more specific to that district. And they provide a map as well, which shows what the opportunity sites are and some of the prominent features of the district. For the Downtown North area, you'll see that the goals include things like encouraging redevelopment of underutilized parcels, including public garages, making connections between the east and west sides of the Downtown North District via Cameron Street, promoting infill development on either side of Georgia, just north of Colesville, improving the roadway network, supporting the expansion of the life science and other biotech industries that are in this area, and then the promotion of ground floor uses that will engage the community. And those can be of a variety of types, not just retail. And following that, they provide then the recommendations, which are grouped into categories. There's urban design recommendations, parks and public space recommendations. There are the recommendations on opportunity sites, and then there's zoning. So we'll go through these one by one. Under the urban design recommendations, those are at the top of page 6. They basically are similar to what you just heard as the goals of the plan. They implement some of these ideas, these recommendations, to recommend infill along Georgia Avenue with ground floor uses, to implement a green loop along Cameron Street between Fenton and 2nd Avenue. There's the implementation of a green loop along Spring street as part of a secondary outer loop. Increases in public spaces and community gathering opportunities, improving pedestrian crossings, and providing more public through block connections throughout the district. Council staff reviewed those, and they all seem appropriate. And the only thing I would mention, though, is that this general idea about the green loop and the secondary green loop, those are really covered in the parks and the open space section of the plan, the public space section of the plan. So those really will get covered later when we get to those. And if there's any tweaks or changes there, it could possibly just change this language a little bit, but I don't anticipate it. Just wanted to make a note of that. But those things will need to be consistent once those plan-wide conversations are had. And that's true for everything in the district section. Once we have plan-wide conversations, it will be on us to go back and make sure that they are consistent with these districts. In parks and public spaces, the recommendation is to create an urban recreational park that is close to Cameron Street and 2nd Avenue to support an increased level of activity and occupants in this area. There are big residential projects going on there, and so this would support those new residents. And council staff supports that recommendation as well. The opportunity sites for the downtown north are parking garage 7, parking garage 2, and then you'll see there are additional opportunity sites listed at Georgia Avenue, 2nd Avenue, Fenwick Lane has 2 as well. And looking at those sites on the map, they seem appropriate and provide good information. And I don't believe we received any specific comments from DOT on these garages, but we'll look into that as well. I did read through a letter from them, but I don't remember seeing anything in particular to these 2 sites, but I'll look through it. The next is zoning, and again, this is where the zoning in the districts are all pretty similar. They equalize this commercial residential CR value, which we've just had a discussion of whether that does or doesn't promote commercial development. It certainly allows for complete flexibility. And then bringing the zoning of non-compliant, or what we think of as non-conforming parcels, into conformance, and then the building height incentive zone is in part of this area to achieve some higher heights. And then you'll see a map of the district below this language. It says at the top of page 7. It shows you the different parcels, and then there's a table so that you can then read what the zoning recommendations are related to the numbered mapped parcels. There is one correction. Table 6 has zoning map number 67, which provides a zoning category, but there's actually two sections that make up sort of this block, not just one. And so you'll see the correction on the next page, top of page 9.
Okay, so just one comment, Pam, as you alluded to, I do think as we get further through, we should have a focused conversation about the overall level of commercial versus residential zoning. And, you know, what do we think is the right balance there? So we don't have to necessarily take it up piecemeal, but anyway, I just want to flag that. So, okay, keep going.
Can I make a quick comment on that?
Sure.
I think what we've found is that when we use the CR zones, our initial practice had been to try to be very clear and, in a sense, restrictive, and say, well, here's where we really want commercial and here's where we really want residential, and we're going to put a certain amount under C and a certain amount under R. And what we've learned over the years is that we almost never get it right, and that the goal is to have flexibility, so that if you have a CR zone and you equalize the C and the R, then you're able to, the property owners are able to respond to the market. They're able to say, this is what the market is telling us we really need. And we're able to do that without having to come back in for some sort of a zoning change. So what we've done in almost all of the zones here is we've equalized the C and the R. And that was a specific strategy to actually be flexible enough to encourage commercial, if commercial is what the market is calling for, or residential. And I think that, when you look at how much commercial there is versus how much residential there is, well, what we're really saying is let's give folks 100% flexibility, which is what we hear from the development community that they really want and need, and figure out how we can and again, we can have conversations about this, other kinds of incentives and programs. We can really try to get that kind of commercial development that you were discussing earlier in the meeting. But from a zoning perspective, everything we hear from the development community is that flexibility is key. So I just wanted to sort of
Thank you.
introduce that.
No, I agree with that. For any one project, I think the question we do need to add is when we step back and look at the whole of it. If everything were to build out as residential, would we be okay with that? Or do we think that there is only a certain amount of residential ultimately that we would like to see? I mean, I don't. These are complex questions, but I think it would be helpful to have an understanding of it. What is the existing commercial? It could be that the existing commercial, also given trends which are towards more telework, and consolidation, that the existing commercial is sufficient. I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. I just think it'd be worth some, some transparent discussion and thought.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
If I could just add, I agree with you. I think it's an important, really important question for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, and the flexibility. While I think a lot of us like flexibility. Is good. It's going to, my experience has been is that there will be, it will be used primarily for residential, just because that's just what will happen, and people want to live in Silver Spring. And people know what they're going to get with that as far as people who are making the investment. And we do need to ask that kind of core question of not only are we okay with that, but what does that mean for the infrastructure of the community and what we can do and what is sustainable and all those things. So we need to ask it for a number of reasons, in addition to what's the mix of commercial and residential and what will the market bear, because I think you're exactly right. I've had like 3 conversations in the last 2 weeks of like very successful companies that are just closing their offices. They're not going to keep their office open in the long term. They're going to, and a couple of them were in Virginia, so you'd be happy. We always like to compare to Northern Virginia, but a couple of them were Northern Virginia. They're just not going to have their office, and they're just going to work remote. And I think that is not something that was going away anytime soon. You can see in DC the issues they're having there. So I think that does need to factor in, particularly in a place like downtown Silver Spring, that that needs to factor in. So I'm glad you raised that, and I would like to have a larger conversation where we compare everything. But I would just add, Ms. Dunn, that also in planning that also include like the broadest possible capture of infrastructure too, school, capacity for school. I know you guys looked at that, but I think we need to have that discussion in public too about those things. If it were to build out, what would that mean, and what would need to happen, and who's going to pay for it, et cetera. So appreciate that.
All right. So again, I think, the potential implication of office trends is towards consolidation. How much do we have? How much, what do we think are the long-term trends for that? And then, how does that play out through these recommendations? Okay, Andrew.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, I think, the plural of anecdote isn't data for all of us. And I think the anecdotes are really important. And I think it's helpful for us all to have the conversations that we're having. But, there's also another trend in the other direction where we were seeing a massive consolidation of square footage because of the cost of real estate over the last 25 years. If you look at what a law firm, they had legal libraries in their office buildings that took up a tremendous amount of space. They had huge corner offices. We're seeing that contract significantly in office environments to more collaborative space and open space and flex space. And now there's potentially a shift back. And I'm hearing from other people about more separation and more opportunities for individual spaces as well because of the dynamics of the pandemic. So I'm not smart enough to know which one of those factors is stronger. I think we need to look into that further. But the reality is we're not going to know exactly what the future holds, and that's why it is so important that flexibility be provided into these plans and the vision of what we want. I think as we were talking about this earlier, I think there is work that we can do to strengthen the vision of what we want Silver Spring to be, which is a thriving economic center and a livable, walkable, accessible community. Those things can go hand in glove. We don't want Silver Spring just to be a place where people live. We want it to be a place where people live and work and play and stay, and that requires us to be focused on all these things. So I think it's a really helpful discussion. I just wanted to add to the mix. The conversation has focused, based on the pandemic, on this idea that people are going to work remotely overwhelmingly as we move forward. Some of that might be true and maybe a lingering trend, but there's also trends in terms of the amount of square footage per employee, particularly in professional services, which is changing in the other direction. And it speaks to the complication of these issues, why Ms. Wright and her team have a very difficult job to try to plan for a future that is unknowable. But that's why the flexibility is so important. And I think there was an attempt to be flexible here in this. I think we need to review that and flesh that out as we continue to discuss this plan and determine if it's the appropriate level of flexibility and if we want to make any tweaks to it. But I just think it's an important part of the conversation.
And let me just add, it's always sort of hard in these because you're seeing the conclusion. You aren't seeing all of the work and the data that was collected that went into achieving these conclusions. So we do have background work that was done on looking at the mix of residential versus non-residential, the impact on schools. We have all of that data and the studies. We can share that with you. They always in school, you want to see our work. Well, we can, have you see our work. But again, the reason we came up with the recommendations we did as the plan is based upon, an understanding that we probably are going to, have a mix of office and residential, let's call it non-residential and residential, that is probably going to remain the same in Silver Spring. At least that would be a good goal, rather than having it get out of balance with residential taking over. So the plan did assume a sort of existing balance between non-residential and residential, and we can show you that one.
Yeah, that's insightful, because that's an example of something that's between the lines, but I think should perhaps be aligned. So let's take a look at that. Thank you very much, and bring that out a little bit as to what those expectations are and why. Okay, great. Okay, keep going.
Okay, thank you. Well, that concludes the staff report's review of the Downtown North District, and I've taken notes. Oh, sorry, Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I just had one other question about and perhaps we can come back to it when we have the broader conversation of how the boundary lines all look. But in terms of the specific decisions of what properties were included and weren't included in the, I guess it's called the BIZ, like we call it PHED, the bonus height incentive zone. For those watching along to understand the new, it's a silent H, but I'm not sure if now is the time to learn more about that, or if perhaps we'll come back to it. But I think it'd be helpful to understand some of the decisions.
I think that's plan wide, right? I think when we get to the plan wide content, Pam, but go ahead, tell us, Pam.
Well, what I would say is I think the philosophy of having the BIZ is definitely something we will cover plan wide. I think if if you know of particular properties within this district that you are interested in knowing why they were or weren't drawn within the building height incentive zone, I think that you could ask the planners that now because it is specific to this district. I will just mention that the building height incentive zone is something that covers some portion of 4 of the 8 districts. So it's not plan-wide in its applicability. It'll only cover a portion of 4 of 8 districts.
Yeah, I mean, it's less a conclusion that I have of what is or isn't, and more of a better understanding of what is and isn't included and why. And I think it would be helpful for us to better understand that. But if we're not ready to have that conversation and that level of specificity now, I think that's okay. But I do think that we ought to have it before we move forward with the plan. So I'll yield to you, Ms. Dunn, and the chair on what the best avenue for that. I'm certainly comfortable coming back to it if that's better, or if planning's ready to. I see Chair Anderson has his hand up, so if they're ready to have it now, that's fine too.
I would suggest we don't do that deeper dive right now, but we could certainly plan it out for the next meeting. But Casey Anderson.
Yeah, I was just going to say we don't need to have that discussion right now. But I would urge you not to make decisions about specific properties where heights or densities implicate the biz and those other concepts until you've had the discussion of the biz and those other incentives. And I'm thinking in particular, I'm just jumping ahead a little bit to that property at the corner of Colesville and Georgia, where there's been a request for more height and density. My suggestion to you would be, rather than make a conclusion about that right today, you wait until you've had that discussion and maybe come back to a couple of those properties at the end after you've had that fuller discussion, because I think that will give you sort of a more informed perspective on why the relationship between the business, other incentives, and some of those specific height and density recommendations. I know you have to get through all these properties, but really there's not that many that are actually subject to requests for something different.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. I think we should proceed district by district, but I understand why you're saying that. All right. Any other? Okay, Pam.
Okay. So that brings us to the Ellsworth District. We're right now at the bottom of page 9 of the staff report. And as the plan notes, and I think most of us feel this way, that the Ellsworth District is the heart of Silver Spring. It has Veterans Plaza and Ellsworth Place. They are very successful, and they continue to provide an avenue for a lot of business, not just retail and commercial, but United Therapeutics very close to these. Just outside the Ellsworth District, you have businesses there as well. And of course, we know that when we had the Discovery Building, it was one of the huge impetuses for the growth in this area. And it was a very big employer that provided a lot of energy for that area during the day and into the evening. So you will see on the bottom of 9, you have the goals for this district. Again, it's about hoping that there's new development to strengthen the Civic Building and Veterans Plaza area, that there is improved pedestrian connections in the area of the Colesville and Georgia Avenue intersection, that there's improved public spaces and pedestrian areas, providing additional green space when there's opportunities through new development, and redeveloping remaining opportunity sites in the district that maintain predominantly retail and commercial pattern that's already there. You'll see a map of this area at the top of page 10. And again, following the format of the other district, the recommendations are provided for urban design, park and public spaces, opportunity sites, and zoning. So under the first one, you have a bullet on urban design, which is that new buildings along Colesville Road and Wayne Avenue should include a tower setback above the 2nd floor to continue the pedestrian experience along the sidewalk of a low to mid-rise building form. And the comment from council staff is that I totally understand and recognize the value of creating a comfortable pedestrian scale, especially in an area where you're trying to encourage more of this. But additional flexibility may also be appropriate to provide flexibility for other development and commercial development. Certainly, there are places along Colesville Road that have high rises, one after the other. I can think of, the hotels that are on Colesville. They aren't small scale. They aren't 2 or 3 stories. And so the recommendation is here just to provide language that would allow the planning board to forego that setback in context to other properties, the abutting and confronting properties to anybody that comes through for redevelopment. It's not getting rid of the idea of this bullet. It just says there may be a context in which the neighboring properties aren't small scale. And so is it appropriate to require a redevelopment, something we do really want in Silver Spring in certain locations, to have to provide that tower setback?
So more flexibility so that it's more context driven.
Mm-hmm. And approved by the planning board.
Okay.
The
Makes
next
sense
one,
to me. Okay, Gwen. And Casey, if you don't mind, please taking down your hand so I know when you actually are requesting, then it'll bring you to the front of my screen.
So, we don't at all disagree about the idea of flexibility, and we think that we're not at all disagreeing with council staff on this, but we do want to maybe tell you a little bit about lessons learned in Bethesda, where we had our first design advisory committee for a commercial area, and it's been pretty successful. We are going to be doing design guidelines for Silver Spring that will actually build out some of these ideas that will be used by the design advisory committee when they're reviewing projects. But what we learned is that there is always the exception to the rule, and design guidelines need to be flexible enough. I'll use as in Bethesda, the Avocet building. We had design guidelines in Bethesda that essentially called for setbacks above a base, and that base isn't literally 2 floors. The base could be 6 stories, it could be 5 stories, but above a base. And most of the other projects are doing a setback above a base. But with the Avocet, they came in with a very innovative design, and they said, we want to do an inset, not a setback. We want to have a building that essentially is flush with the street, but we're going to set it back 60 feet in the air and create this sort of outdoor room at this prominent corner of Montgomery and Wisconsin. And we loved that idea, and it's been built, and it absolutely is not consistent with the Bethesda design guidelines, but it's a great design. So every kind of design review process needs to have the ability to accept a great project that doesn't meet the letter of the design guidelines. And we're glad to work with council staff on, sort of how to articulate that. I think, again, I want to just be clear, we were never sort of saying it's 2 stories and then a setback. We were really saying that there needs to be a base, a clear building base, and then some stepping back, which has, again, been really successful with a lot of buildings in Silver Spring. But we also don't disagree that there's always an exception to the rule, and you might have a really creative design solution that does something completely different. So I think it's a matter of just trying to figure out how to articulate that clearly in the plan.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
Great. The next bullet involves Ellsworth Drive between Fenton and the exit from the Town Square Garage, including it as a flexible street that can be closed for farmers markets and other festivals. And then vehicle traffic would be limited to loading and emergency vehicles, and street parking would be either removed or limited. I think it's pretty much how it is functioning today. So there's no comment on that. The next,
A long time goal of mine to see the street festival use or street use extended from upper Ellsworth, so to speak, to lower Ellsworth. And I've been glad to be part of making that happen. It has contributed a lot to the ability to do larger events there. And, we should keep that going.
Okay. The next are parks and public spaces. There's a bullet that says to support continued work with the Maryland Historical Trust on appropriate improvements to the parking lot at the Silver Spring Shopping Center to better draw pedestrians through the lot into the Ellsworth Place Mall. And then there's a second bullet to provide a neighborhood green in the redevelopment of the parking lot at Whole Foods. You have an addendum on this. We did have testimony. This was my mistake. I had pulled up the testimony on the council website and started to go through it, and then got pulled off onto something else. And it was my mistake not to get back to it before the staff report was done. So you had an addendum that was put out on Friday, and it included comments on this particular area, and then other comments related to the Metro Center District, which you'll cover with Ms. Nadeau in a few minutes. But for this one, you had a letter from the Art Deco Society, and it really was about their comment that they thought the tone and the care of this comment. And then you received another letter, by the way, last night late on the same thing, the staff report for this, or the addendum, which just mentions that this first bullet here with respect to the parking lot area in front of the Silver Spring Shopping Center, it's also listed as an opportunity site, that parking lot at Ellsworth Plaza down the last bullet under opportunity sites. And the comment from the Art Deco Society was their feeling or sense that it was placing sort of an ancillary use of this area as more important than its preservation and its importance to the block and to the view of everything. And you have, their letters. My comment in the addendum, which I still believe, is that planning staff and council staff could work together to read through Ms. Chalfie's information and her suggestions and work together to make language that is, it takes into consideration those concerns and the tone here without necessarily removing recommendations, but we can open it up for discussion.
What was you said you received an additional letter?
Yes, it came in last night. It basically reiterated really, I guess, maybe concerned about that rewriting of the language. It still felt like it didn't place enough emphasis on the preservation component of this area. So, and we could engage Ms. Chalfie in that rewrite. It's,
All right. So the point that Ms. Chalfie is making is that preservation here goes beyond preserving the buildings. It's preserving the parking lot use. And I am struggling with that a little bit. I understand it. I agree with it in one sense, but I also would like to see that be a great pedestrian environment as well. And it's an important one, so I don't know what this language that's in the plan was intended to, bring about. So let's hear from our planners. Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, we simply do not agree that it is an appropriate use of historic preservation to preserve a use, particularly surface parking. We believe that it is not inconsistent at all with the goals of historic preservation in general, or the specific historic setting that was adopted here, to recognize that there are better uses of that space for the public, in the public interest, than to continue to guarantee that it remain a service parking lot. That is not to say there needs to be a building there. Maybe there could be a small building, as I think even the Art Deco Society acknowledges that an activating use in a small building might be appropriate here. It might continue to be hardscape, but to allow it to be a better pedestrian environment, it could even be an auto-oriented use, like a pickup and drop-off point for taxi cabs or rideshare, for example. But the idea that we're preserving this space as a parking lot for the storage of cars in the 21st century, we submit is not a good idea. And on the specific points about parking for disabled, nothing in this recommendation precludes or suggests that there shouldn't be parking for the disabled. And I would just remind you that many disabled people can't drive, and making downtown Silver Spring as walkable as possible and making transition away from auto-oriented uses is, in fact, I think in everybody's interest of all physical abilities. Lastly, I would just point out that historic preservation is supposed to be about historic preservation and not about preserving anybody's particular preferences about what uses are appropriate on property. Adaptive reuse should accommodate flexibility and the evolution of spaces over time while preserving the heritage that we're all seeking to protect. And that's possible by preserving the building envelope, but not just the buildings, the historic setting. And again, we're not suggesting that there should be a development site right here in the middle of this parking lot. What we're saying is that it should not be written into law or there should be no interpretation of this historic setting that suggests that the only historically sensitive and appropriate way to preserve the site is to guarantee that cars can park there in perpetuity.
All right. Thank you. Let me just expand a little bit here. I mean, if you really were thinking about the historic use in its parking use, you know, back in the day, you would pull up into this corner lot and you'd go into one of the storefronts there. And that was what the parking lot was for. Today, that is really not how it is used. It is a parking lot in the Silver Spring area. It is one of many, many, many parking lots. And as someone who parks in downtown Silver Spring regularly, you know, if you're thinking that you're going to go to Panera, you know, maybe you go into that lot, but you're just as likely to go somewhere else. It isn't used in the way that it historically was used for parking. So I struggle with the idea that we would be preserving its historic use, you know, in that sense. You know, you could preserve the appearance of having cars in front of those retail, you know, those storefronts. But it's not really the use either, you know, it's even more subtle. But conversation here. So we have, Pam, what are you, you had said we could have language that, you know, walks it back a little. Now you're saying you received other testimony. You're not so sure.
No. I'm sorry. My comments were confusing. What I said was we had received this we had received the original testimony from Ms. Chaufey, and I included that as in the addendum. Upon getting that addendum posted, she reviewed that and still felt that maybe or was not satisfied that just rewriting the language would be sufficient enough, although I still feel that if we work with planning staff, we can do that. I think it really isn't, I don't think there's a huge disagreement here. I think what she is just simply trying to convey is the importance of the setting for the building as well. And not saying that it needs to continue to be a certain type of parking lot, but that there should be language that references and recognizes its value as part of a whole, rather than it being just this parking lot. It's a tone thing, and it's about what's the focus here, which is she would, I think, prefer to have the bullet start out with preserving the lot as part of the site, and then recognizing that it can have different uses. I don't think that that's completely out of the realm of what she's considering. So I would check.
So first of all, I mean, I do agree. Like, we have preserved these buildings and we have preserved this layout. And if we don't present the historical meaning of that preservation, then there's really no point in doing it. You know, so it should communicate a different, you know, an historical approach to land use. That is what we're trying to accomplish here. And again, if we don't succeed with that, then what is the point of having tried? So on the one hand, I think that's important. You know, there should be some nostalgia, I suppose, as you drive by or as you experience that location. This is the way things used to be. And I think that we could explain that in the language. I also think that there should be some flexibility here. If I'm recalling you know, I don't know if it was Peterson that wanted to do some outdoor seating there. And I don't know whatever happened to that, but like, why wouldn't we allow that? And we, you know, I wouldn't want to have language that would seem to say you couldn't have something like that. So that kind of thing. Okay, so you'll keep working on, okay, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say I'd be interested in seeing what the language that can be, drafted, and there may be agreement, there may be a slight discrepancy of what planning views. I do agree the character defining shape, as was described in the letter, I believe, I agree with that context of the historical preservation. But I also very strongly agree with planning and the statement that was made earlier that the use is not historic. Buildings are historic. The shape could be historic, and there's nothing historic about a 2020 car pulling into the parking lot. And so, to the point that the chair made a few minutes ago about having tables and chairs and benches in that lot, perhaps as a use, and other creative placemaking uses, even a food truck pulling in, allowing people to access, that would not be in contrast to the historic preservation of the character defining shape, from my perspective at least, of that lot. So if we can find language that reflects that, I would be all for it, just to be clear of my perspective of this. And I just hope we make that distinction in the language from the buildings are historic, places are historic, uses by definition are not historic, and we have to make sure that we're reflecting that in any language that we have here, so that we don't incidentally have language that is inconsistent with a what could be a very appropriate historic reuse that actually serves the modern needs of residents while respecting the historic preservation.
All right, I want to agree. I also think it's possible that the county preserved the parking lot as a parking lot. That is possibly what the county did. So I don't know for sure.
My point is, but then that's not historic. Like if you are preserving a parking lot as a parking lot, you are making a public infrastructure decision about storage for cars today and for the modern kind of current future. That by its definition is not a historic preservation decision. It is a current and future looking planning decision. Whether it's right or wrong, we can debate that and discuss that of whether that is the best land use. But I don't think we should confuse. I think the point here is, let's not confuse historic preservation with the applicability of current uses. And if we can find a way to marry those concepts in an appropriate way that we can agree to, I'm all for that. But we have to make sure that we understand what the concepts are. There's no such thing as historic preservation for current parking. I mean, that just doesn't exist. And if it does, then I wouldn't support it. So just to be clear about that, if the historic preservation is what the lot looks like and the character defining shape of the crescent of the roadway, then sure, that could be historic, so folks can understand what this looked like when it was built. We can keep it for moving forward. But what it is used for is not a historic preservation decision, nor has it ever been. Just like for a building, the outside of the building is historically preserved. What happens inside the building, it does not have to be reenactments of the historic use of that building. That's just not the way that historic preservation works.
All right, so we'll look further into what the historic preservation of this site is, and we'll look for some language here that can continue to signify the history, but allow for some appropriate evolution all the same. So that's my goal. All right, let's continue.
Okay, so at the top of page 11, what you'll see are the opportunity sites for the Ellsworth area. They're listed. There is one in particular that now has two pieces of correspondence on it, which is the 8551 Fenton Street, and the draft it was referred to as 8551 Colesville. And so what you did, you received a testimony from Ms. Sears on behalf of that property owner, and she requested that additional language be added to the bullet designating this property as this redevelopment site that would be appropriate for a tall building. She wanted the additional language. And council staff's comment on that is that it is in the height incentive zone area, which would allow for this greater height. I don't think it's appropriate to add that additional language to the bullet, as that would then call into question every other property or building that is in the building height incentive area that is not noted for being appropriate for additional height. I think if you're in that zone, that is basically what that is already saying. So I don't see the additional languages as necessary and possibly confusing. But in the letter that you received last night from Ms. Chalfie that discussed the concerns with the Silver Spring Center parking lot, she also talks about this building and did not realize that this building was being offered as an opportunity site, and didn't realize the lengthy letter that Ms. Sears provided to the council with a lot of information on a possible redevelopment of this site, quite a large redevelopment. And so in the letter that you received last night from Ms. Chalfie, she provides a lot of history about this building, and that it is basically, it was the Fenton building. It was the site of Morton's first suburban department store. That Morton's was not only founded by a significant local Jewish businessman, but long before the passage of the Federal Civil Rights Act. The store was renowned for its integrated dressing rooms and bathrooms and the hiring and serving of African Americans. And she goes on to, in her letter, talk more about the historical significance of this building, and her concern for it being an opportunity site with no other information about it being an opportunity site, what the intent of that is, and that it's not referenced, I believe, as a historic property and what this provenance is to the building. So she strongly urges the committee to exclude it as an opportunity site in the plan. And we did receive that late last night. I don't have any more information on that. I don't know if it's the interest of the committee to just put a pin in that as an opportunity site, to request this additional historical language be something that gets considered and added to the plan. It sounds fairly important to me.
I think we might have lost the chair here temporarily.
Jointly, Councilmember Johanna, turn to planning.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Ms. Wright.
And I'm going to ask Atara to also weigh in on this. So, and this is a little complicated, so bear with me for a moment. A large portion of downtown Silver Spring was originally on the Locational Atlas and Index of Historic Sites. The Locational Atlas is not a full-blown historic designation. It is a way of showing an area may merit designation in the future, and it does put into place a protection against demolition if a project is proposed for a particular property on the Locational Atlas. When a property is fully designated, like the Silver Theater and Shopping Center, it is what's called on the Master Plan for Historic Preservation. And that's different than the Locational Atlas, which is essentially a sort of interim protection to make sure properties don't get demolished before they have a full evaluation and a decision made on whether they merit historic designation or not. So there are a number of properties in downtown Silver Spring that are on the master plan, such as the theater and the shopping center, such as the Montgomery Arms Apartments. But there are also a number of properties that are on the Locational Atlas and are in this sort of interim protection. A lot of the properties on the west side of Colesville Road, like the old JCPenney facade, and the other small retail establishments along that side of Colesville, like this building, the Fenton building, like the historic Hex building, which is where Ellsworth Place Mall is located. The portion of it that's down near Ellsworth, the limestone curved facade, is actually on the locational atlas. So when a property is proposed on the atlas is proposed for change or demolition, the Historic Preservation Commission, and we also have John Liebertz here from the staff of the Historic Preservation Commission, is required to take a look at whether that change that's being proposed will irrevocably alter the property. That's why a lot of the changes to, for example, the old Hex building, which is Ellsworth Place, have been allowed because you can still see the building there, even though signage has been added and so forth. But if it's a full demolition being proposed, then there would be an evaluation as to whether to take it off the atlas and move it forward for designation, or to take it off the atlas. So I guess what I'm sort of saying is being an opportunity site and being on the locational atlas are not mutually exclusive options. You can have an opportunity site that is on the locational atlas, and if the developer at some point moves forward, and files for demolition, then that site would go to the HPC and the planning board, and a decision would be made as to whether it is really worthy of full master plan for historic preservation designation, or whether it should be taken off the locational atlas and the alternative development would be allowed to to move ahead. So I don't know, Atara or John, is there anything that I missed?
The only
John
thing
Liebertz. Sorry, Tara.
No, I'll add one thing and John can take it from here. Just want to add that this is something that we did discuss with the property owners numerous times. We had many discussions with them, so they are fully aware of of everything that Director Wright just covered with regard to how the building would be treated in a redevelopment.
John Liebertz,
Okay.
for the record, and I was just going to echo what Atara just said about our discussions with the property owner.
Could I ask a question or two here?
Oh, I am back. Can you see me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, please. Sorry, I did cut out there for a minute.
I think it was just for a second, but
Well, it was about 60 seconds, I think, maybe longer. So are we still talking about 8551?
Yes.
correct.
Okay, thank you. Please continue. Go ahead, Andrew.
Just a quick question on that. I just want to kind of clarify where this leaves it, because I think there's an interesting dynamic here. But the first question is, how long do buildings like this stay on the locational atlas, and at what point, if ever, is there I don't want to say a put up or shut up, but a kind of make or break decision of whether it stays or whether it is removed, unless that is only until there is an application for demolition when that decision gets made, as you just noted?
So generally, we do not like to leave properties lingering on the locational atlas forever. And that's why, as a department, we do go through locational atlas sites and try to evaluate them and make a decision one way or another. And that is part of our work program, generally, is to go through atlas sites and to bring them forward for full designation or to remove them from the atlas. This particular property, has not gone through that process. And so, in all likelihood, the decision would be made with it when a particular application came forward. It may be that depending on the work program in our historic preservation section, which is very, very busy, it may be that at some point, even before an application came in, we'll get back to looking at Silver Spring properties, not only this one, but some of the others that are mentioned in the master plan that could merit evaluation in the future. But it's more likely, I think, that for this particular property, it would be when a project came forward and filed for demolition.
Appreciate that. It's helpful to understand. So the decision before us is whether to include this as an opportunity site, and then ultimately it will be the planning board and the Historic Preservation Commission's decision of whether or not to move it to the master plan for historic designation for historic, which would prevent a redevelopment from occurring, or to remove it from the transition list, the locational atlas.
It is an opportunity site already. So I was just going to ask, it is an opportunity site in the plan draft, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the decision on because this is the decision. Well, the decision before us is with that. The question is the planning board process and the Historic Preservation Commission process in any way prejudiced by whether or not something is an opportunity site? Is that part of the decision, or is it based specifically unrelated to that on the historic nature of the building itself?
Well, I think if there was a demolition permit filed for the building, it would be an evaluation on the historic nature of the site. It wouldn't be necessarily weighing, although there actually is some language in there about weighing whether the alternative proposal is of public benefit versus the historic character of the resource, but it would be mainly based on the historic character of the resource. And John, did you want to add to that?
Yes, I just wanted to add that, being labeled as an opportunity site doesn't mean historic preservation can't occur. There's different levels of historic preservation for buildings, right? So you could have facade preservation, you could have frontage preservation, where a part of a building, part of a historic building becomes part of a much larger tower. And so all those are still on the table, even with the building being, even with the site being labeled as an opportunity site.
Yeah, and that's a great point, which is that if and when a project comes forward, there may be opportunities to work out some element of the building being preserved as part of the new development. And, we just don't know till we actually see what is being proposed.
Okay. Well, that sounds fine. So existing language is good. We don't need to say that it would be appropriate for a tall building, because there's no reason it wouldn't be appropriate for a tall building. I think that's your point, right, Pam?
Yeah, my point is that that's fine to not have reference to the tall building. The only thing I would also ask the committee, though, is I think that the letter from Ms. Chalfie with all of the historical information about this building in particular that was not referenced at all in the plan, and a plan that says that it has interwoven racial equity and social justice throughout it, and yet sounds like a pretty important piece of history related to that. And I think that's why the concern was, as listed as an opportunity site, there was no other information, just simply at this address, this is an opportunity site, where there could be additional text that says it has historical context. This is not in opposition to it being an opportunity site, but this will be taken into consideration, or some other reference to it. I think that her letter was very compelling about the history of this site.
I see. I missed that. And I think I was not connected while you were describing it. So do my colleagues have a motion then?
Yeah, I would see nodding, and I seem to be nodding too. So I think council staff recommendation on including language to memorialize the history, just so that it's known as part of the conversation, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, and that it'd be factored into any potential future opportunity. I think that was part of the point too, right, Ms. Dunn, that people will just be aware of that going forward if it were to be redeveloped. Okay, thank you.
For the chair, that just in case you missed it, just so the specific context here that was shared in the letter, as was noted, is the fact that it was a prominent Jewish-owned department store, and it was one of the first to have things like integrated dressing rooms and food counters and others. And so there is a significant historical and racial justice element to the history. That was what was shared in a letter.
Where the mattress store is now, that's what we're talking about? That corner? Yeah, interesting. All right, thank you. All right.
Okay, I can move forward. Thank you for all those useful information. So in the zoning, this is the last section under the Ellsworth District. You'll see similar language to the other districts, equalizing the commercial residential, rezoning. In this case, the rezoning employment office building properties to CR, and then also mentioning there are properties that will be within the building height incentive zone within this district. And then you have a map of that. You have a table that gives you, again, the map numbers and the corresponding existing zoning and proposed zoning. And the only thing council staff would note is that there's a property map number 1D that basically is being proposed for increased density to make it conforming. It is a non-conforming property, but there's no change in the height. I think for that, planning staff can weigh in. I would just suggest that the height be increased the same 20% that everything else has been increased. And I think maybe because the confronting and the abutting properties are all at the higher height or much higher height. So retaining this one at 145 when all abutting and confronting properties are between 175 and 240 feet. Maybe that would be a useful thing. So that's my comment. So maybe Atara can weigh in.
Can you just remind me of the block number again as I'm looking at? I think that was actually an error, and that you correctly.
1D is in 1D.
Right,
is in
1D.
God.
It might have just been a typo. In which
I believe
case
it was just a typo.
fine.
It should have been 175. Yeah.
And we're fine. Okay. Well, that concludes my two districts. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Nadeau.
All right.
So next up is the Metro Center District. So of course, this is a big commercial center in the Silver Spring, and it'll have the tallest buildings and the densest development. So some of the goals in the plan for the Metro Center District are to create a better arrival experience by having more public space and more connections to some of the surrounding districts. And this will be done by redeveloping 5 opportunity sites as well as enhancing the pedestrian experience. So first, for urban design, there's a few recommendations. The design guidelines will address the street level pedestrian experience for the taller buildings, that there be a design competition as well for enhancing that arrival experience, improving the underpasses with art and lighting and wayfinding, and then also use of the green loop, which, as Pam noted, is something we will cover in later sessions. So council staff supports all of the urban design recommendations. Next up is parks and public. Sorry, go ahead.
But before you go, I like this. I think we took up some of these ideas when we did the Silver Spring placemaking plan some number of years ago. You know, we've got some big parking garages there, and if they're not developed, I think they could be kind of a canvas for some very interesting visual elements. You know, there's a lot of like structures there to the point about an arrival experience. You know, there's a lot of structures there that we could use as a, you know, a way to create a presentation so that when you come to Silver Spring, you know, there's a wow factor. And I would love to see that happening. You know, I'm thinking of like that garage in LA that Frank Gehry did, where they put chain link fence on the side of the garage and then they grew, there's like a pattern to it. It might even have lettering. You know, it's a giant display potentially. So I like this focus. I think it's interesting, and I hope that, you know, we can do something with it. Just wanted to say that. All right, keep going.
So for parks and public spaces, the recommendation is to expand and reinforce the open space connection, again, between the arrival experience at the transit center, the recently redeveloped spaces along Wayne Avenue going down to Ellsworth Drive, and then beyond to the Civic Building. So council staff supports this recommendation as well.
Okay.
Next up is sorry, are there any comments on the parks?
What is the timing on the park there that's going in? I forget that it's at the corner of Wayne and Colesville.
Gene Lynch Park.
Lynch, Urban Park.
That's like pretty imminent, right?
We have staff from parks here. Maybe they could address that. Christina, are you able to comment?
Put the camera on. Yes, the Gene Lynch Park is scheduled to open April this year. So it's advanced. So we are hoping to have the inauguration this year still. So crossing fingers, we should have more into that. So before it's almost done. So.
All right, thanks. Okay.
So next is some of the opportunity sites. So the first one is the Transit Center development site. So the plan recommendation is to design a signature building here at the intersection of Colesville and Wayne Avenue that can hopefully be integrated with the transit center. The goal is to activate the corner with the ground floor use, something that's appropriate for an urban area, and that the building be architecturally significant and become a landmark. This site is very constrained, so another recommendation is to consider providing no parking and developing the site along with the garage over on Dixon. And then also the plan recommends that the maximum building height on this site be permitted to exceed 300 feet, consistent with the building height incentive zone. Council staff generally supports this recommendation, but does suggest adding language to clarify that while the maximum building height can be permitted to exceed 300 feet, elsewhere throughout the plan, it notes that it can only go up to 360 feet, and that's with planning board approval. So just to note that there is a cap on that additional height.
Was there supposed to be a cap on that, or are we saying you can build as tall as you want here? What was the intent of the plan? I wouldn't be mad if they said you could build as tall as you want on that site.
So the cap is actually referenced in other parts of the plan, not in the specific district session. So council staff's intent was just to make sure, since it's referenced elsewhere, to also note it here.
I see. All right. Okay.
Sorry, go ahead. And then similarly, the next opportunity site is the parking garage. That's County Garage 555. That's the one on Bonifant and Dixon. And so consistent with the parking lot goals, district goals for this site, to redevelop this garage, the plan recommends that upper level connections be removed, which will create 2 large redevelopment and then 1 small site that are appropriate for that open space. And some of that's discussed later in the Ripley district recommendations. And that the redevelopment of this be also to note that this is where the purple line tracks will be, so it's appropriate for a ground floor experience. And then this garage has a similar language about the 300 feet. So again, noting that that's up to 360 feet with planning board approval.
Okay.
The next opportunity site is Colesville Road and Georgia Avenue. This is at the top of page 15. That's that northwest corner. So a hotel is currently approved on this site, and the plan recommends expanding that development site to include an adjacent 2-story property as a signature mixed-use development, and council staff supports that recommendation. And then the next one is Causal Road and East-West Highway northwest corner. So this site is immediately adjacent to the Northern Metro Station entrance, and it's really constrained by a WMATA substation. And the plan recommends continuing to pursue relocation of the substation in order to create a signature development here, and also recommends incorporating or connecting this site to the arrival experience. Council staff does agree that relocating the substation would be the best option. That would be ideal. But to allow some flexibility, another recommendation that could work here is if we can't relocate the substation, that it can be incorporated into the redevelopment. So either by being underground or being integrated in some other ways. This is something that's been done in other regions when there's a substation relocation issue.
Yeah, I mean, who pays for that? Yeah.
Makes sense to me to at least allow it as an option.
Certainly allow it. Yeah. Okay.
How to pay for it and how to get
So
it.
you
It's
allow.
going to be a very complicated conversation, but it's not one that we have to have in the master plan.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, and so that is, oh, sorry, there's the last opportunity site is 8407 Colesville Road. This site is currently underutilized and is home to a McDonald's. There's not a specific planning recommendation here, but council staff supports this being an opportunity site.
Okay.
Next up is zoning. So that's on page 15. So as with most of the plan, the zoning recommendation, which I know we've discussed earlier in today's work session, was to equalize the commercial and residential density to create flexibility. And then there's some parcels in the building height incentive zone. We did receive, and there is an addendum, of course, that you have before you. In the addendum, we received a letter about a property located at 8600 Georgia, and it's actually all the same owner as 8501 Colesville and 8615 Ramsey. So this specific site has a proposed zoning of 5 FAR and 200 feet in height, which is actually consistent with the increases throughout the plan, which are about 20%. But if you zoom in on the property, you'll see that all the abutting and confronting properties actually have an 8 FAR and 240 feet in height. So the property owner just asked to be treated the same as all those neighboring properties. Council staff thinks this makes sense. You'll see in the packet for the addendum, if you look at the two maps, it's all the properties right around it have that additional height and density. So council staff recommends having that match. And I know this was discussed earlier, and I see Chair Anderson has his hand up. So.
Thank you. Well, I'm strongly inclined to agree here. I don't know why we want to single this one out for less. And this property has been struggling to get going for a long time, and I'm concerned about making it harder instead of supporting its redevelopment. So, Chair Anderson.
Yeah. I think Lebu has done a great job of framing this. The height recommendations are very consistent. As to the FAR, I just want to caution you that a number of other property owners who don't have exactly the same FAR as abutting properties have basically accepted the BIZ and the incentive package that represents the basic foundation of a lot of our proposals for creating opportunities for additional amenities and infrastructure in downtown Silver Spring. That's part of the reason why I urge you, if you want to do this, wait till the end. Because if you don't, you're going to get a line of land use lawyers stacked up at the door, all wanting their FIR bumped up. That's just, I lived through downtown Bethesda with I don't know what it was, like dozens of work sessions. It was a nightmare. Don't do that to yourself, please. If you want to give them more FIR, do it at the end. You just hold on to this and come back to it. I'm not going to fight you on it, but I'm just suggesting to you that if you open this door, it's going to create a ripple effect from other properties and their representatives that will complicate your efforts in this plan. So again, not trying to be a stumbling block here, but I think you can come back to this after you've had the opportunity to look at the BIZ and the other properties, and then you can do your thing, whatever you want to do. But I really think that
Are you distinguishing between height and FAR?
Yeah, because I think you'll find that the height is actually very comparable. The density, I'd have to concede, is not similar to the other properties because for whatever reason in the last master plan, it was mapped at a lower density. I can't explain that. I'm not here to defend it. What I am saying is there's other properties in the CBD that also have anomalous FARs. And if you're in it, and I think it would be pulling the thread on the sweater to bump up this FAR today, because then you're going to get a bunch of people end up saying, what about me? What about me? What about me? And you're going to have to look at every property where there's potentially an issue. Most of those property owners have basically bought into what we're trying to do here. So what I'm saying is, if you want to look at this at the end, great. And maybe you'll decide to do that. And like I said, I'm not here to fall on my sword over this one property. What I'm saying is that if you do this today, you're inviting a whole laundry list of issues with people say, me too, me too, me too. Please, I'm just looking out for your best interest in trying to manage this process. That's as candid and as direct as I can be. I hope you'll see the wisdom in what I'm trying to suggest to you.
And if you all are interested, there is a history as to why certain properties got what was the CBD 2 FAR, which was 5, and which ones got the CBD 3 FAR, which was 8. And there was a rationale and a reason. Everything across Colesville Road on what's called Site 30, but is known as the old Discovery site, it's all 5 FAR and 240 feet. And the idea, again, was to do the 8 FAR closest to the metro, and as you got near Colesville Road and Georgia Avenue, that it would be the 5 FAR. The only exception were for buildings that had been previously developed and that were at a taller height, and they, in a previous plan, were given the 8 FAR so as to not be made non-conforming. So there are certain ones that were given 8 FAR because if they had been given 5, they would have been non-conforming. Some of them are not at 8 FAR, but it was a conformance issue. So there was a rationale for that. It wasn't like this property was being singled out. It was part of, in the last plan, a logical sequencing of density.
Okay. Well, in general, I have some concerns about not, I want us to be getting out of the way and helping the private sector achieve the goals that we're setting here. And, super tall buildings within a block of metro is something that is inherently a good thing. It's whether it's commercial or residential, it's transit focused. And I think we ought to be making it more possible and less expensive in any way that we can to make that happen. So I, in general, I want to provide with the most height that we think, is realistic, and provide adequate density to achieve it. Let's hear from folks. Councilman Friesen.
I think Councilor Joanno had his hand up first.
I'm sorry. I didn't see that.
No, it's fine.
Appreciate that. Thank you. So, I appreciate Chair Anderson's candor here. I mean, I share that concern about everyone coming in at once. I think that's important. Whether or not it's the right policy objective is kind of a separate question of when it's more of a sequencing that you're talking about of when we would do it. I also agree that generally, like, you want to have, if there's a group of buildings within and I know that area very well. I had a campaign office right there. I had we all know that area. I worked at Discovery. We always talk about Discovery. I actually worked in that building for almost 2 years. And I think, having that be consistent, there's a strong rationale there. I guess just talk to me a little bit, I guess it'd be planning about this particular request was made prior to the Silver Spring plan being considered, right? And then it was, so it was said it was going to be wrapped in. Could you talk to me a little bit about just the history of why it wasn't taken up in your process?
Well, you'll recall that there was originally a proposal for a hotel, which I think was 200 feet, and we were excited to approve that. In fact, we did approve a development application. The holdup there was the water and sewer connection. And that's one of the things that drove the recommendation in this plan to create some infrastructure funding opportunities as part of the incentive packages that we discussed. So I'm not here to tell you there'll never be anything taller than a 200-foot building there, but I do think it would be quite ambitious. Under the plan as we proposed it, this building could get to 300 feet. Right. I'm not suggesting that you should try to hold that back. As to this general question of incentives and opportunities to do more and getting in the way, that's again why we think that you should look at the BIZ and the height and FAR incentives and requirements and get a fully informed understanding of how that all fits together. And before you rush to any conclusions about, oh, this is too much to ask of this property, it's too little to ask of this property. Right. So that again just reinforces our suggestion that perhaps if you are inclined, that's fine, and it's certainly a prerogative. But I think if you'd hold off, you'd find you'll be glad that you did, both because you'll avoid this rush at the door for more from everybody else, and because you'll be able to do that in the context of a more fully developed conversation about the incentives and obstacles to development. We believe when we come back at the next work session in a couple of weeks, we're going to show you some economic analysis that shows that, in fact, the incentives and requirements that we're proposing are not going to get in the way of development, and they will produce some important public benefits. So again, we're not trying to push you away from any particular result here. We're just trying to make sure that you do that with the benefit of the full discussion, so you can have all the facts and understand how it all fits together, and also to structure your deliberations in such a way that are as orderly as possible.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I was going to comment on that larger point because I have not yet, though. I know we've received testimony, and the chair who might have lost him again.
Still here, thanks. I just turned off my camera. Thank you.
Okay, good. You're there. Okay, good. Has made a couple of points about this larger issue of what's allowed and not, and what will be able to move forward and not, as he just did now. I agree that from a process standpoint, we should take up the BIZ or am I saying it right? I know Councilmember Friesen said this, or is it the BIZ? Okay, good. It's like the BIZ and PHED. Okay, I feel like it's a band. Or something.
But not to be his.
Yeah, exactly. And the other fund, the SIF, or what was the other fund? CI, is that right? Okay, got it. BIZ and SIF. Take those up and have that policy discussion. I think that would make more sense, and then decide what we're going to do with those. I really am happy to hear, which I was going to ask you offline, but I figured you all would come because you're very prepared anyway to talk about the economic analysis, because I think the frame of this, has been, well, we just got to get out of the way, and this is going to make it too hard. And, when we had our meeting, I had the opposite concern. Is this enough? Are we asking for enough public benefit, enough affordability, enough infrastructure investment? And I think your point about the water and sewer line coming up in the hotel application is an important point, right? And I raised this earlier. What can the downtown bear, and what can it do? Both physical infrastructure, both community, school wise, the capacity, the roads, the pedestrian infrastructure, and then you have a lot of plans to make those investments, and we're going to have to pay for that. And these are some significantly increased heights, which I think are generally right. But we do have to make sure the public benefit is right. And so I am, just so I can frame where I am in that discussion, I want to hear that detailed analysis and make those decisions in that context. because unfortunately, I think, and I'm often on the side of 2-1 votes on this, the get out of the way narrative is the predominant narrative on this committee and I think on the council. And while we all want to allow appropriate and exciting new development opportunities, I certainly do, and I love downtown Silver Spring, as I talk about, we have to make sure we are the only guardians of the public benefit. No one else is. And that is our job. And no one else, as much as people might say they care, and they really do, that's our job, and we get one shot at it in this type of context. And so I just want to make sure that we do that appropriately. So I would suggest that we do hold off now and not do this at this point and have that larger conversation and then come back to it. So that's where I am, and I appreciate the additional information from planning. Thank you.
All right, Councilman Friedson.
Thanks. Yeah. So first of all, in terms of like actually taking a vote and deciding on heights and density, it's probably a distinction without much of a difference if we're in the same place. But I do understand the point, and I would be okay if we wait. I mean, ultimately, all of these decisions piece together, so we're not really deciding fully on the plan until we've decided fully on the plan. And certainly in this plan in particular, there are a lot of related parts. And so I appreciate that we're going through the way that we are to provide context so that we have it for the biz conversation and the SIF conversation, so we understand what these policy implications are, and so planning can present why they've done what they've done and suggested what they've suggested. I would just say from my perspective, the idea that we're basing the height and density off of what was there is not a good enough justification. And so consistency with abutting and confronting, as council staff has suggested, is absolutely where I would be and what I would be supportive of. So I'm fine, kind of confirming that and then, coming back to exactly where we land on the density and height question, so that we're not changing height and density in the middle and getting the line of folks who want to change that. I will say, public engagement in the process of master planning is not such a bad thing. It is part of the process. It is something that I think we ought to welcome. And I will say also, if there are other sites similarly that are inconsistent with abutting and confronting properties, and there isn't a compelling public interest reason for that to be the case, I think we ought to take a look at those too. And so I just wanted to put that out there. And so, if we want to keep this as a signal from the committee, but not a final decision point, I'm personally fine with that, but I'll be clear from my perspective, inconsistency with confronting and abutting properties, unless there is a compelling public interest rationale in order to do that, which I haven't heard here related to that property. I think we ought to be as consistent as we can and move forward accordingly.
When
I'll also note, just since Councilmember Joanna did, I'll also note I 12 years ago worked on Colesville Road in an office building as well. So yeah, I think and I think it speaks to the fact that
I got you both beat. I worked there in 1994, 1995.
Well, in fairness, federal labor laws and other restrictions would have prevented both Councilmember Joando and I from being in an office in 1994. But that notwithstanding, I think it speaks to, I just wanted to note this, all of our connection and interest in Silver Spring, that this is not, an area of the county that is important to one community or to neighboring communities or abutting communities. This is significant in terms of the context of the conversation we have in total to the entire county's economic goals, environmental goals, housing goals, and quality of life goals. I think it was an important note that all three of us have direct connections. And I think all three of us are reflective of most residents of the county that have some connection to Silver Spring in some form or fashion, through housing, through work, through recreational opportunities, through arts, opportunities, through quality of life and parks dynamics. I just, I want to note that, although not totally related to this particular decision point.
All right, Gwen Wright.
Thank you. I just wanted to note that this is sort of a difficult property because if you had a map that actually showed you all of the adjacent and confronting properties, there are almost as many confronting properties that have 5 FAR as there are adjacent properties that have 8 FAR. If you look across Colesville Road, at, I guess it's called Site 30 on the same map that this is on, that is directly a confronting property and it's all 5 FAR. If you look catty corner at a map on page 12, Site 1A, it's also a 5 FAR property. So this is sort of a weird one because it is really intermixed with properties that are both 5 FAR and properties that are 8 FAR. It is not accurate that it is completely surrounded on all sides by 8 FAR properties. And I just want to make that clear. So the other part of it is that, and again, I think this is again what what Planning Board Chair Casey Anderson was saying is that we strongly have endorsed that we are in favor of great new development in the county, but that development needs to pay for development. That development is the commodity to create the public benefits that create a great place. That has worked really, really well in Bethesda, and you're going to be getting in the spring a sort of annual report on all of the infrastructure that has been created in Bethesda, along with the lots of new buildings. And it is a balance that I think needs to be achieved. The lesson I learned when I worked in Alexandria, Virginia, and that I've tried to introduce coming back here is that simply, and I'm going to speak very bluntly and directly, simply throwing density at a property is not the way to get development, not the way to get great new development, not the way to get great communities. We've tried that in places like Glenmont, where we've thrown lots of density, and it isn't the answer. I think that we really and truly are in Bethesda created a system where we balanced providing opportunities to get additional density in exchange for providing the elements that helped make a great community. And we're trying to do that in Silver Spring as well, including elements like affordable housing, like infrastructure, and we have a specific list of infrastructure projects that could be funded. So it's not just, helping with sewers, it's for the bridge across the tracks that you're going to be hearing about, and a variety of other really important projects. So we need to remember that there's a balance between wanting to incentivize development and that development that helps us create great communities, and getting the investment in the community from development to achieve those goals. So I just wanted to sort of lay that out there from a philosophical perspective.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So my feeling here is I feel much more strongly that height should be mapped. Density, we have like a lot of existing practices about purchasing density. So I'm a little less concerned about that, but I do need to see how everything works together in the end. Okay, so where does that leave us here, Lubu?
So it sounds like the committee's decision is to defer changing the proposed zoning until we discuss the PHEs. Is that where the committee is leaning?
That's where I am.
Well, I think we should do the height, but, see what Councilmember Friedson thinks.
I support the height and revisit the density when we deal with the biz.
Yeah. All right, we start with that. Okay, so I think that's probably 2-1.
Yes, they're both Councilman Friedson and I have our hands up. Councilman Friedson's first. So.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Whoever was first, please. Oh, are you raising your hands to vote or are you raising your hands to speak?
To speak.
Raise your hands to speak.
Okay. Whoever was first, please go.
Appreciate you yielding back. We can defer appropriately in this meeting, so I appreciate that. I just had we're raising, we have the specific plan that's before us right now, but we're raising some macro level issues that are unrelated, or perhaps related, but not sourced necessarily in Silver Spring or in the deliberation of this plan. And I was just wondering, and perhaps this is a discussion for another day as well, but I do think it's interrelated. It seems to be that there is some suggestion that the CR zone public benefit point system is not working to the extent that we would want, whether it's not getting the infrastructure that we would want or the type of infrastructure that we would want, or whether there is some disconnect here, but that seems to be at the root of what is being discussed. So I'd be interested to hear kind of a general thought process of that, and then whether or not it would be appropriate for us to, do a bit of a dive into that, because I think that is what you're reflecting here. And if we're trying, it seems to me at certain points we're trying to fix problems that might create new problems. They might solve one problem, but they might create other issues, and have certain degree of pushback. And if the dynamic here is that there's a system that isn't working, then maybe we should do a deep dive into actually addressing that. And that's separate necessarily from this master plan, but perhaps that might be a work program addition that we ought to look at. So I'd be interested to hear from Mr. Anderson and Ms. Wright on that quickly. And then, obviously it's not something we can deliberate on today, but I think at a macro level, as a broad point, I think ought to be discussed as in the context of this conversation.
Yeah, I'll make it very brief. I think that the CR public benefit points should be revisited occasionally because, with benefit experience and market conditions, but also as a default, I think they're generally fine. They could certainly be tweaked and should be adjusted. But I think what you're seeing is that in the CBDs of Silver Spring and Bethesda, and perhaps there are a couple others, they're simply not similarly situated. And so what's appropriate on a countywide basis for the CR zones may not be the same as what's appropriate for specific, very intensively developed central business districts, where honestly there are more opportunities to be a little bit more creative, push a little more, but with sensitivity to the market. And so I think it's really the difference between being kind of having a background default set of rules and also acknowledging the fact that on a neighborhood or district specific basis that perhaps a modification or deviation from those rules is certainly appropriate. And I guess the short way of saying that is foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds.
And I was just going to add that when you review our fiscal year 23 budget, you will see a work program item to evaluate the CR public amenity point system. So we are looking at adding that to the work program, and you will see that in our budget proposal.
I appreciate that. I do think that it is an important part of the context of the conversation. If we're discussing the question of, public amenities as part of the development review process, then certainly the foundation of that, system, which is the CR zone public benefits points for these type of, optional use development, optional method developments, I think, needs to be part of the conversation, but I appreciate that. I'm glad. And I will say I'm supportive of us taking a look at that because I think it's important. And I think that, I look forward to reviewing the work program, but I think that is an appropriate project to add to the work program for a lot of different reasons, because it has a lot of different implications.
Great. I appreciate that. And I'm glad I deferred because I was going to raise a similar point, and also really happy to hear from Ms. Wright and team that will be a part of the work program. I know we received a letter from one of our largest and best Silver Spring employers, United Therapeutics, bringing up this point, among other things, about the public benefit system and what should qualify and not. So I'm glad we'll have the larger discussion as your work program, but we obviously will have a miniature discussion later here as we go through the plan. I did want to make a very important point that I think I actually win, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Friedson. My mother worked at Business Publishers Incorporated starting in 1989 on Pershing Drive. And as an 8 or 9-year-old, I went there every day after school. And many of the reporters there would say I was a part of the staff. So labor laws aside, I think I've got the longest tenure in downtown Silver Spring. But no, thank you very much. I think my questions have been answered and will continue to be answered going forward.
All right. Yeah, I worked across from where Silver Branch is now in 1995. And I got to say, it was tough working there. There wasn't enough restaurants. Wasn't enough places to spend time.
No.
And Silver Spring's a much better place to work now.
Absolutely. It was you had that McDonald's. You had that McDonald's at the end of Pershing.
Yeah.
That was pretty much it. And Tasty Diner, of course, was across the street, but
Right. Yeah. Okay. So
just to recap, it sounds like they're changing the height now, but deferring on changing the density is the first point. And then second,
just so you know, Ms. Nadeau, I want to wait for all of it. So if you could just make that known,
Right. So I'll say 2-1 for the height. Okay. And then as an additional note, because we are going to be going over the biz and the SIF next week, that if planning staff could just make sure to send council staff that economic analysis and any other stuff that goes along with those two pieces, like ASAP, so that they can be part of the packet, so that next week we all have it in front of us. And then with that, we will move on to Ripley District. So Ripley is as described in the plan, as a micro neighborhood within downtown. So where people live to be close to things. Right now, the vision is for a multifamily residential district that's next to the Metro and the Purple Line and the Metropolitan Branch Trail. And the vision is to have a new central open space and then a pedestrian connection to South Silver Spring across the Metro Rail tracks. So the goals for the Ripley District are to encourage redevelopment of the underutilized sites, including those on Georgia, as well as turning the existing public parking garages into mixed-use projects with active ground floor uses. In addition, increasing the housing stock so that there's a diverse mix of multifamily units at different levels of affordability. Next, improving the pedestrian connection and the arrival experience at the Purple Line station by Ramsey Street. Bonifant Street and at the Ramsey Street at the upper level of the transit center. Creating a new open space in the Ripley District for active recreation and social gathering, and then connecting Ripley District across the Metro Rail tracks to South Silver Spring. And council staff supports all of those recommendations. Or all of those goals, sorry. So then the recommendations begin at the bottom of page 17. So the first one is to a redevelopment site along Georgia Avenue. So this was mentioned earlier by Pam to design buildings with that low-rise 2-story base. Council staff again recognizes benefits of the neighborhood feel, but as discussed earlier, allowing some flexibility. For instance, if it's mostly 3-story buildings around the property, than to do a 3-story base. And I believe Ms. Wright talked about the flexibility that planning was intending in that area. So council staff will work with planning staff to sort of tweak that language to make that clear.
Okay.
And council staff supports the remaining recommendations for urban design. So first, creating that sense of arrival by having a welcoming pedestrian connection from George Avenue to the Purple Line station at the upper level of the transit center, connecting the Ripley District to South Silver Spring via a landscaped pedestrian bridge that'll go over the train tracks and have infrastructure for both pedestrians and cyclists, and introducing a mid-block crossing at Georgia Avenue and Mayor Lane to connect Ripley with Fenton Village, and then implementing the green loop concept along Silver Spring Avenue so that the street, along with the pedestrian bridge, will all serve as a connector to the central loop. And again, we'll talk about the green loop in more depth at later work sessions.
All right.
Next up is parks and public spaces. 2 recommendations here. First is to create a civic green at the center of Ripley District, which is consistent with the recommendations in the 2010 Green Space Plan guidelines. And that'll be a good focal point and social gathering space for the neighborhood, and also connect to the that proposed pedestrian bridge. And then second, creating that urban recreational park that's currently by the parking garage on the east side of Dixon, I believe, and adjacent to that existing alley. And that park would have small scale activities designed to serve the residents of the Ripley District.
Okay.
Next up is opportunity sites. So first is that Dixon garage. So the plan recommends redeveloping the site by providing a green space with a pedestrian connection to the Purple Line station at the center of downtown, and this will be a buffer from the rail tracks. The plan also recommends eliminating the existing garage bridges and creating an opportunity for a tall tower here. Council staff generally supports this recommendation, but again, this is another spot where it's important to note that the site will be permitted to exceed 300 feet, but only up to 360 and with planning board approval, which we've noted with other opportunity sites.
Okay.
Next is the block, the next opportunity site is the block of Ripley Street, Dixon Avenue, and George Avenue. So this is a pretty large development site along Georgia. The plan recommends redevelopment of the site to include a central open space that could potentially connect across Ripley to the 8230 Georgia Avenue site. Council staff supports that recommendation. Next is 8126 Georgia Avenue. So this is a long, narrow site that fronts on Dixon and then extends onto Georgia. And the plan recommends mixed-use redevelopment of the site with access from Dixon Avenue. Again, council staff recommends support of that site. And then next is 8230 Georgia Avenue. This is the Sherwin-Williams site. So the plan notes that the site is really constrained by the master planned right-of-way for Ripley. So because that's going to really reduce the amount of developable area. Previous efforts to incorporate this into adjacent developments have been unsuccessful. So the plan recommends coordinating redevelopment of the site with the property that's across Ripley Street. Late last night, we received a letter from ADSW noting that asking the PHED committee to recommend that this and other buildings be surveyed and where appropriate be added to the locational atlas. So again, the committee discussed this earlier this morning. Council staff supports this, but we'll defer to planning if they have additional comment on this site specifically. But again, just want to note that historical preservation isn't necessarily incompatible with this being an opportunity site. Oh, and this is another spot where it should note that it can go up to 360 with planning board approval.
Okay, this is a tricky site, that's for sure, has been for a long time. I don't know if we have to discuss it. Any quick comments from planning staff?
Sure, this is John Lieberts. So for the Sherman-Williams site, staff did survey this site. We found the building not to be architecturally significant. We had a consultant look at this site, and the Maryland Historical Trust has separately looked at the site as well for architectural significance. And we found it did not meet the criteria for that. That's just staff's recommendation. Regarding the cultural, oh, sorry.
Oh, keep going, John. Sorry.
That's fine. Regarding its cultural significance, I think there's other opportunities to look at the civil rights movement in Silver Spring. In particular, we call out the American National Bank building, where Roscoe Nix worked, where he led his sit-in movement at Cabela's restaurant in downtown. Also, there is already a designated little tavern restaurant in Bethesda, which also represents this aspect of the county's commercial history.
All right.
I'll just weigh in. This is Gwen. This is where my long tenure comes to play. There was an effort to save both the little tavern and this building, and many years ago, which failed, and the little tavern was demolished, and this building was altered dramatically. It was changed quite a lot. And so we have been sort of through this. This is one of my battle scars from the past, because actually at the time I was advocating for it to be designated. It didn't get designated, and I think it is one of those examples of a building that has changed so much, which is, as John is saying, that it's really sort of lost the opportunity to be designated on the master plan for historic preservation.
All right. I know I appreciate it as a funky building in downtown Silver Spring, but it does not necessarily mean that it rises to the level of true designation. So, all right. Any other comments here? Okay.
So lastly, for this district is the zoning recommendations. Again, as with other districts, equalizing that commercial and residential density for flexibility, and then noting that there's some parcels in the building height incentive zone. Council staff did have one correction here for map number 37. It should be split into multiple parcels. I think it was just an error in the table for the existing. Council staff is not recommending changing the proposed zoning, just that parcel should really probably be 3 different map numbers instead of 1.
All right. Okay. So where does that leave us here in terms of, do we need any additional votes, or we're good for now?
So I believe that's everything for today, assuming committee's fine with that correction to that map table.
Yes.
Then yeah, so next week we're going to be covering the remaining 4 districts, as well as the plan-wide recommendations. We'll include the BIS and the SIF. And yeah, you will get that staff report later this week.
Okay. Thank you so much. Without any other comments, then I think we can adjourn. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. All right.
Of the county's landmass, dedicated to farming.